Welcome to the Business of Thinking podcast. This is the place for high achievers who want more than motivation. They want mastery. Here we skip the surface level talk and go straight into the psychology of high performance.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Thinking. My name is Reid, and today I've got the pleasure of being joined by Calum Chace. And Calum is an expert on artificial intelligence. Welcome, Calum.
Hi, Richard. Good to see you.
Good to meet you too. And often how we start these conversations is by asking people to talk a little bit about how they've arrived at the career that they've arrived at. Do you want to give us a little bit of a potted history of what's brought you up to this point?
Sure. So I retired from a 30-year career in journalism and business about 15 years or so ago. And I had always been very interested in AI, particularly since 1999, when I read a book by a man called Ray Kurzweil, which some of your listeners may know. Kurzweil has for a very long time predicted that in 2029, he's been very specific about that date for a long time, 2029, we'd have superintelligence and the world would change beyond all recognition. And when I first came across this idea in 1999, I thought that is truly amazing. That's the most important thing I've ever heard. And I still think that. So I was always interested in finding out more about it. And when I retired, I started reading everything I could get my hands on. And I wrote a couple of books about it. And my timing was immaculate because they came out just after the big bang in AI in 2012 when deep learning arrived. So people started asking me to explain and give talks about the future of AI. And I've spent the last decade or so going around the world doing that and writing about it. And latterly, I'm a co-founder and chief marketing officer of a company called Contium, which is an AI safety company working on safety issues, both in the short-term issues about AI and the longer-term issues. And we may want to talk about both of those.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the short-term potential of AI and some of the risks that go with that. And then let's move on to the longer-term aspects. So over to you. Tell us a little bit about those short-term prospects.
I imagine most of your audience have used GPT or Gemini or Claude or other large language models. So we'll have an idea of how incredibly impressive these things are. And of course, we're all familiar with things like Google Maps and Google Search, which is driven by deep learning. So these are the two major breakthroughs in AI this century, which have completely changed AI. AI has been around as a science since 1956, but it didn't really make any money until the first Big Bang in 2012 when deep learning arrived. And then we had the second Big Bang in 2017 when transformer technology arrived. It didn't become obvious to most people until 22 and 23 when ChatGPT became available. So large language models are incredibly powerful, and people are using them day to day already, often without the complete happiness of their employers. But their employers are trying to work out how to use large language models on enterprise scale. And this is tricky because they do still make mistakes. They make a lot fewer hallucinations than they used to, but they still do make mistakes. And they lack common sense. They just don't have common sense. And also there are issues about where will your data go? If you feed a lot of data into a large language model, is there a danger that it will leak out? So there are some hurdles to the enterprise value. But what we're going to see from next year onwards is the growth of the use of agents. Most people have heard of AI agents. They've been really the obsession of the AI community for the last year or so. An agent is a system which not only sort of retrieves and analyzes information, it impacts the real world. So it can book airline tickets for you. That for some reason is the example everybody uses, almost the law. It reconciles your bank accounts, can negotiate with other agents online. You can send them off to do shopping for you. And they do this to a certain degree with autonomy. So they are only partially supervised by humans. They're very simple at the moment. I mean, most of them, to be honest, most of the agents that are out there at the moment really are knowledge retrieval plus a little bit. But they're going to be increasingly pursuing activities which are a series of tasks strung together without supervision. And they're going to use tools. They're going to go and use Jira and Excel and perform their function using those tools. And then so those are kind of the first two stages of agents. And then the third stage is where they start to act almost like humans. I mean, they're not human, they're far from it, but they act almost in replacement of a human at work, some of the tasks of a human anyway. And they will be negotiating and discussing with each other and with humans. And one of the things that's really important is that as agents do this, it's really essential that we know and we're confident that they do what they're supposed to do and they don't do what they're not supposed to do. This is one of the
I noticed you used that phrase without supervision a couple of times. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're going to set these agents off without supervision or with only partial supervision, you need to know what they're going to do. And that's one of the things my company is doing is a process called verification. We put agents through their paces. We get them to do what they're supposed to do and monitor how they perform under the test circumstances and provide a very detailed report to the organizations deploying them as to whether they're performing well or not. So agents is probably the big thing for next year. And over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, the timing is impossible to pin down, we're going to see gradually more and more intelligence available to human workers. And that's going to be, very, very impactful and very good. It's going to improve the performance of economies around the world, which is why the hyperscalers and others are investing such vast amounts of money in data centers to accommodate these things.
Yeah. And before we sort of move on to the longer term prospects, if you run an organization or you run a team with an organization, how do you mitigate against some of the gaps in terms of the performance of AI at the moment? Because I guess it's open to interpretations, and different employees might lean a bit more than others. How do you manage that?
Well, none of us should let anything produced by an AI out into the real world without checking it. And that can be done. If you're just using a large language model yourself, then you should review its work. And if you've got colleagues using it, then they should review its work. But the whole point of an agent is to be able to operate partially without supervision. That's why you need to verify that they are going to do what they are supposed to do and not what they're not supposed to do.
Yeah. So you get that more general confidence in it before you allow it to do things. Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned that sort of key date 2029. Where are we in relation to the things that have been earmarked for 2029 if we look more towards the future?
So, to be honest, nobody really knows. And opinions vary a lot. So I think it's telling, though, that the three people who run what I call big AI, so Sam Altman at OpenAI, Dario Amodei at Anthropic, and Demis Hassabis at Google DeepMind, they all have said that they expect to see superintelligence or AGI by the end of the decade. So if they're right, then Kurzweil is and has been ever since the 1980s bang on target, and quite incredibly so. What they mean by AGI is slightly mysterious. It keeps changing. Superintelligence is a fairly simple concept. It means an AI which has all the cognitive abilities of an adult human, and some of those abilities it will have to an enormously superintelligent degree. So already there is really no point to human playing chess against a decent computer, because you're just going to lose hands down. But the computer doesn't know it's playing chess. It can't tie its shoelaces. It can't make its way out of a burning building. There's a lot of things that machines can't do yet. When superintelligence arrives, there will be nothing that humans can do cognitively that it won't be able to do. The word AGI has a long and convoluted history. Well, I say long, about 10 years or so. But people use it to mean all sorts of different things. Some people use it to mean a system which can do everything that a remote knowledge worker could do. I heard Shane Legg from DeepMind using it that way the other day. I think it really is best used to mean the threshold between where we are now, which is pre-superintelligence, and where we'll be when superintelligence arrives, post-superintelligence. In which case, AGI is something that will come and go fleetingly. It'll only be around for a few minutes or maybe days as we just cross over from narrow intelligence to superintelligence.
Wow. Frightening speed. And when we think about the longer term prospects, people come out with all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas about what that means. Some people go to films like Terminator and say, well, is AI going to take over? Where do humans sit in terms of society and the workplace and all those kinds of things. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they're not necessarily wrong. I think that when superintelligence arrives, the world is going to be a very, very different place. And timing-wise, I say we don't know. I personally think 3 to 5 years is too soon. I think it's probably more like 10, maybe 20. But it's coming, within the lifetime of many members of your audience, for sure.
Yeah.
And we are in this extraordinary position where, as a species, we are rushing towards making ourselves the second smartest species on the planet. And we don't know whether that's going to be good or bad, and we're not paying very much attention. I spend my life talking to people about this, and they go, wow, that's really interesting. What's for tea? And I just find this never-endingly amazing. And I also find it amazing that the few people who are thinking about it are the people taking us there. So those 3 men, and they are men, rushing us towards this, they all have said there's a pretty decent chance that when we get to superintelligence, it will render us extinct. And yet they're rushing towards it. So that's another amazing thing. But there are, I think, enormous upsides. We are the most powerful species on the planet by a margin because we're smarter. And our smartness displays itself in lots of ways and displays itself in lots of negative ways. But it is intelligence that means we can solve problems. Intelligence gives us technologies, and technologies improve our lives enormously. If we could have, 100 times, 1 million times the intelligence we have available to us now, we could solve all our current problems. And I mean problems like war and poverty and death. So a future with a benign superintelligence could be wonderful beyond belief. One of the things that people worry about, and rightly, is that AIs will automate all current human jobs, or most current human jobs.
Yeah.
And I think they will. But I think a world in which machines were doing all the jobs could be a world in which humans get on with the important business of life, which is playing and learning and exploring and having fun and socializing and helping each other as humans, spending a lot of time with each other. But we don't have a plan for how to make sure it works out like that. So the obvious problem, although this isn't the problem people tend to focus on, the obvious problem is distribution. So by hypothesis, once machines are running the economy, once machines are doing all the jobs that we used to do because they're cheaper, better, and faster than us, they'll be creating enormous wealth. And the trick is how to distribute that wealth among all human beings. It's not hard to envisage a world in which Sam Altman, Dario Amodei, and Demis Hassabis, and a few thousand other people basically own all the productive assets. They own the AI, and some people in China. How are we going to persuade them?
Reacting to that, so that's a scary thought, isn't it? And we're investing a lot of trust in people who may not have our interests at heart.
Yeah, I personally do think they are people of goodwill. That's probably a minority view, but I do think they are. But I don't think they've thought carefully enough about how to redistribute the incredible wealth that their machines and machines owned by people in China as well, and a few elsewhere. How do we share that around the world among everybody? How do these small group of people in San Francisco share it to Somalis and people in Sweden and Italy? It's a big problem. It's a problem I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I'm going to be spending much more on it next year. And I think that problem will be faced before we get to superintelligence. I think that having AIs which can do everything we do for work, for jobs, everything we do for money, it's probably not an AI complete problem in the sense you can have an AI short of superintelligence, and yet it has totally automated the economy. But we'll see.
Yeah.
And like I say, time-wise, could be 3 years, could be 5 years, could be 20. We just don't know. And it is amazing that we're paying so little attention to it.
We seem to be sleepwalking into it. How clued up are governments? Are governments getting back up to speed on this, or are they really sort of putting their trust in these 3 people to do the right thing?
In a word, no. I don't think most politicians are even aware of the situation, or they are vaguely, but they're not taking it seriously. You hear some every now and then. Rory Stewart, who's on the well-known podcast,
Yes.
The Rest is Politics, he is starting to grapple with it. He's not all the way there yet. And if you're listening, Rory, I've got some ideas for you, so get in touch. But he's unusual, and most governments aren't talking about it. I think most politicians aren't thinking about it. And it's only partly their fault. It's also the fault of the rest of us, because politicians can't get too far ahead of where their voters are, because if they do, then they get kicked out. So we need to demand that politicians take this stuff seriously, and that globally people develop a plan for what the post-jobs economy would look like. I'm convinced there are some extremely positive possible outcomes. There's also some very disastrous outcomes, and we should avoid that, because it could be the biggest own goal this species ever makes.
Yeah, and that's my fear as I'm listening to this. I'm also thinking about the idea of work. It sounds fantastic that we can automate a lot of these things and take work away. But speaking as a psychologist, that people get a sense of identity, a sense of structure from work, and also sometimes difficulty helps to build resilience, doesn't it? And suddenly everything's easy. Knowing typical human nature, most people are lazy. Most people stay within their comfort zone and not take advantage of the opportunities to learn and to play and all the things that you've said. Any thoughts on how we might manage that?
I'm not sure I agree that people are lazy. When people are on holiday, some people just lie on a beach for as long as they can and then go home, but most don't. Most explore cities or go hiking. We are hardwired to work. We have been trained by millions of years of evolution to look for the next problem, look for the next challenge, and solve it. And the end of jobs won't be the end of that. It's not going to suddenly change us overnight. So I think humans will work, and I think that we will find meaning and purpose in our work. It just won't be, on the whole, won't be work we're paid for, because we can't compete against the machines. The AIs plus the robots will be able to do everything we can do cheaper, better, and faster. But I think that just as today, lots of people play golf and they work quite hard to become the best golfer they possibly can, even though they know and they have no doubt whatsoever that they will never be as good as Tiger Woods. Never. Similarly, people paint and they know they'll never be as good as Caravaggio. I think we will all do things which we know a machine could do better, but we want to be the best at it that we can. And I think that's tremendously motivating for people. And I think there's also a misunderstanding that a lot of people have. A lot of the people who have conversations about the future of jobs are people who are in really interesting jobs. They like their work. They really enjoy it. And they probably even get some meaning out of it. Most people are not in that fortunate position. Most people, their jobs may give them some structure for their day. It may give them something to label themselves at a party. But mostly it's about putting food on the table and about giving you a place giving you some sort of status in society. If that goes away, if the need to do that, to put food on the table, goes away, I'm convinced that all of us will be able to find meaning and purpose doing things that are not jobs. I think really meaning and purpose comes from your friends and your family and if you've got a religion, you shouldn't, but if you have, then that your hobbies and beliefs and so on.
Yeah. I hope you're right. I think it sounds fantastic in theory. And if you're a business, how can you be gearing up for some of these changes? It sounds like some of these things we don't know how they're going to play out yet. But are there any ways that businesses can start to get ahead of the curve?
Well, I think for the purposes of a business, what I call the economic singularity, which is the point when there are no jobs for humans or virtually no jobs, is kind of irrelevant, because the business will change completely and it's almost impossible to know what will happen to it. So I think when you're just thinking about the interest of your business, you have to think about the time between now and then. As humans, though, we want civilization not to collapse. So it is worth putting some time and effort into thinking about what might happen next and trying to help raise awareness, try to help get other people to think about it. So, there's just a need for a great big alarm to go off so that populations everywhere demand that their politicians take this seriously. And I think the first step is to draw up some plans for what a post-economic singularity economy could look like. Is it a world in which Sam Altman and the others are heavily taxed? Or is it a world in which we nationalize their assets? And would that be the United States nationalizing their assets, or would it be the United Nations? all of which is going to sound frightful to an awful lot of people?
Mm.
Or is there a way to get large language models set up on what they call sovereign AI, set up in each country, and the wealth somehow is generated within each country so that we don't have to rely on the generosity of the US to keep us all alive? So these things have not been thought about at anything like the level they need to be. And, that's the number one job.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of ground to cover if we're going to hit that 2029 target that's been spoken about. We've got 4 years.
Yes, I mean, as I say, I'm not convinced it is really coming then. There's a very nice couple of images I saw recently where it showed the difference between humans and large language models, the things that large language models can't yet do. On one panel, on the left-hand panel, there was a small series of steps, and the humans were standing at the top of the small step looking down at the AIs, and there wasn't all that much to go. On the right-hand panel, there was one of the steps was called common sense, and it was enormous. So it was like the human was standing on a pillar looking down a long way down at there. And I think there's quite a lot of difference between our common sense and what large language models can do. Now, a lot of that will be eroded as what they call world models are developed, which is language models, not language models, but AIs operating within simulated environments and indeed as robots in real world environments, and acquiring an understanding, or a natural understanding the way we have it, of how physics works. Now, if you combine those world models with large language models, it might be there's not so much difference between us and them. But that sounds to me like the work of quite a few years rather than many months. But who knows? And if it is 2029 that this is all going to start kicking off, we'd better rush because we are not ready.
We're tight for time, aren't we?
Yeah.
So you sort of presented some of the pros and cons. What's your gut feeling on all of this?
As to whether it would be a good outcome or a bad outcome. Well, I think I have a natural disposition towards optimism. So I do think that with the economic singularity, if we plan for it, I think we can make that a good outcome. And then there's superintelligence, which I think will come after a period after that. At that point, I don't think it's going to be up to us to determine how the future evolves, because we will have rendered ourselves the second smartest species on the planet. Now, at the moment, that's a position proudly held by chimpanzees. And there's about 500,000 chimpanzees on the planet, and there's 8 or 9 billion of us. And chimpanzees have no say in what happens to them in the future. And they are in the fortunate position that they don't know that. When we become the second smartest species on the planet, we will know. And we're probably going to find it quite uncomfortable, particularly if the AI either doesn't like us or doesn't hold us in high regard and just kind of treats us with benign or even malign neglect. There are a lot of people who think that outcome is inevitably disastrous. There's a book written by an influential man called Eliezer Yudkowsky recently called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies, talking about superintelligence. Now, I don't agree with his relentless pessimism. I understand his arguments. We're fragile as a civilization and as individuals and as a species, and we need a lot of conditions to say the way they are: the availability of water, the mixture of the atmosphere, the gases in the atmosphere, the constant of gravity, and so on. We can't really afford any of those things to change drastically. But I think there's a more optimistic way of looking at it, which is that we created this new species, and I think it will be a species, this new superintelligence, and it might be grateful for that. It might regard us as its parents, which is an idea that Jeff Hinton who's one of the forefathers of one of the godfathers of deep learning is his title, and he won the Nobel Prize for it. And he's been talking about how we should try and make AIs think of us as their parents. I don't think we're going to be able to make them, but they may do that. And also, I think they may well find us interesting. We're 9 billion little data creators, and AIs like data. They need data. We create a lot of it. So I think that there's a good chance that superintelligence will be favorably disposed towards us, and they will help us, in which case, our future could be golden. And I think there's just possibly one thing we could do to make the positive outcome more likely, which is going to sound quite weird to many of your audience, I think. I think we should think seriously about whether we want the first superintelligence to be conscious or not. Consciousness and intelligence are two very different things. They seem to be correlated, but they are quite separate. Intelligence is about problem solving. Consciousness is simply about experiencing. It's about what it's like to be you, what it's like to be me. And it's ineffably private. I can't know what your consciousness is like, and you can't know what mine is like. But we do actually think it's incredibly important. In fact, in some ways, it's arguably the most important thing we have, even though we know very, very little about it. Now, we might be in a position to decide whether the first superintelligence is an aware, conscious entity or a zombie. And some people say, in fact, most people I speak to about this, their initial reaction is, well, obviously make it a zombie, because if it's conscious, it's Skynet. But I think that's a mistake, because I think that's conflating consciousness with volition, with willpower, or having goals and changing goals. You don't need to be conscious to have goals. You don't need to be conscious to edit and evolve your goals. Machines already have goals, partly because we give them goals. And each goal you give a machine, it will acquire a subsidiary goal, inevitably. And they are beginning to edit their goals as well. So and they're not conscious. It's strongly believed they're not conscious at the moment. So you don't need to be conscious to have volition. In the Skynet story, the system did become conscious, but it wouldn't need it to have. And I think there's a possibility, and I say this quite hesitantly, and it's something that we need to discuss as a species a lot before we come to this point. There's a possibility that a conscious superintelligence will think more kindly of other conscious entities, not just humans, but other animals as well. And when I say that to people, they often reply saying, well, we're not very nice to other conscious animals. You know, we hunt them and we raise them for food and we kill them. And that, of course, is true. But I think it misses a point that we are, on the whole, most of us, much nicer to beings that we think are conscious than we are to beings that we think are either marginally conscious or not at all. So most people would hesitate to stamp on a dog in a way that they would quite happily stamp on a wasp. And I think the reason why we treat those two animals so differently is that we respect the consciousness of the dog. I think it's a reasonable hope, absolutely not guaranteed, that a conscious superintelligence would treat us better than a zombie superintelligence. I think that's the only thing we're likely to be able to do to nudge the outcome in our favor. But I think even the default option, my hunch is I lean towards the optimistic side, but there's a lot of people who lean the other way.
Yeah, there's lots that's yet to be revealed, isn't there? And presumably we can't put the brakes on there. This is work that's already in progress.
It's not only work that is in progress. There is a massive incentive to have a better AI than your competitor. And whether you're in business or in government or running a military force of some sort, you cannot afford to have a less good AI than your competitor. Now, it's that there are some very smart and excellent people arguing strongly that we should pause, that we should stop the development of really advanced AI. So, for instance, that we should have tool AI, but we shouldn't have agents. Don't let AIs run around the internet on their own. Of course, to some degree, it's already too late. But they're saying let's have a pause, and they're right, because that would be the logical thing to do. However, we've got the coordination problem that there's 9 billion of us, and we're not all going to agree. Even if you could get, say, the US and Europe and China to agree to have a moratorium, and that's not impossible. I could imagine a situation where there's been some awful disaster, tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed by some rogue AI, and the world agrees, right, we'll have a pause. We won't take this any further. But the thing is, people would cheat. I'm pretty sure the Russians would cheat. I'm pretty sure the Koreans would cheat. I'm English, so I think the French would cheat. That was a joke. So, the incentive to carry on is too strong. And although now you need enormous resources to build a superintelligence over the next, when it first arrives, it's going to be incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
But as time goes on, computers continue to get more and more powerful. The ability to create a superintelligence would fall within the remit of a small company. So, I don't think we're going to stop, sadly.
Yeah. So it's quite easy for people to go rogue, even if you've got a general consensus.
Yeah.
Wow. It blows the mind, doesn't it? And I can understand why this has become a focus for you. There's so many different facets to it, and as we said, so much yet to be revealed. What are you working on at the moment? So you mentioned books. I know you're a keynote speaker. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on at the moment.
I'm really just trying to get people to think more seriously about this and stop responding by, wow, that's interesting, what's for tea? I've been working mostly on consciousness this year, which was a newish idea. My colleague and the guy who leads the company that I mentioned, Contium, Daniel Hume, who's a brilliant man. He built up London's most successful independent AI consultancy and sold it to WPP before he started this new company. He's still CAIO at WPP. He was the one who had the intuition that consciousness might have an important role to play with making superintelligence safer. So we've been thinking about that a lot. We set up a charity called Prism. We're helping to convene discussions about, can machines become conscious? Are they conscious now? I mean, there's a strong consensus that there isn't, but there are people who think they are. If they are going to become conscious, how long will that take? What does it require? And crucially, would it be a good thing? So I spend a lot of time on that. And I'm going to go back to thinking more about the economic singularity next year. I really want to try and start the process of developing some concrete plans, paper plans, some blueprints for what the post-economic singularity economy should look like. I wrote a book called The Economic Singularity a few years ago, and I wasn't really able to draw up plans because I'm not an economist. So I want to get some economists together and actually start doing that. That's my focus for next year. Plus, the verification business for agents, which is a more short-term AI safety issue.
Yeah, brilliant. So plenty to keep you busy. And Rory, if you're listening, do get in touch. We can pass on Calum's details. And Calum, if people want to find out more about your work and some of the things that you've mentioned, where can they find that out?
So 2 places, contium.com, CONSCIUM. That's about the short and long-term AI safety. And my own website is calumchace.com.
Fantastic. Calum Chace, it's been a delight chatting with you. We'd love to have you back on at some point. Thank you for today, and good luck with all those plans for next year.
Thank you, Richard. This is a fun conversation.
This is the business of thinking. Mastery doesn't end here. See you in the next episode.